I'm inviting you into a conversation I needed to have. Based on my own past trauma and misinformation, I was left wondering, am I being fair to men? So I reached out and I asked a good man, Tom Pryde. He is a man who I trust to speak the truth and to talk to me about a male's view and, more importantly, the biblical view of sexuality and how to steward it well. Join us.
Welcome to the Sifted Wheat Podcast with Leslie Lamb, a counselor by profession, a minister of truth, and a lover of people. This is a safe place where she sets a path for others to learn how to move through hard seasons with confidence and grace, encouraging your faith, empowering your choices, and challenging your perceptions through the Word, the wisdom from years of counseling others, and her own experience of being sifted. Here's Leslie.
Okay, Tom, I'm so glad that you are here with me. And there's a couple of things that I just want to start this conversation by saying, and then I'm just going to let you tell us what we need to hear.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
So I just want to say that I'm aware of two things as I'm in this space with you. And the first is that I know that I'm going to be challenged because I know that I don't always see clearly, but I'm always in a pursuit of asking God, help me read this rightly. So really, that's why I'm inviting you into the room, and where I feel like I've prayed that you are the person to sit in this room with me and to sit with my listeners and to really hear what you have to say. So no pressure. Uh-huh. And then also, I really need to have this conversation because I'm aware that it can come off when women talk a lot about sexuality, and a majority of this series has been talking about how we've gone off the rails in a lot of different spaces of sexuality. And so a lot of times that can come across as condemning, judgmental, a lack of compassion. And I think that there are circles of women who have been hurt by men, and that is their mindset. You know, well, men are just bad, men do bad things, but I don't believe that's true. I know it's not true. I'm married to a good man, and it took me a while to realize that. And I truly believe that there are a lot of good men who are also caught up in this really toxic, negative culture. And so that's another reason why I feel like we need to have the conversation, is because I wanted to talk to a man. Because I can talk to women about it all day long, but that only goes so far. And so really that's why I wanted to invite you in the space and have the conversation. And I actually talked to my husband about it because he is a good man. And I wanted to ask him, hey, I would like to have this conversation with a man. And what do you think about it? And he was like, I really think you need to have that conversation. And the second thing that he said, it really stuck with me. And he said, because it's more than pornography that fuels a man's need for sexuality and intimacy. And I believe that. I really do believe that. And so I want to talk with you more about that.
I think we may have touched on this in our last conversation.
We did.
That pornography is not primarily driven by relationship.
Right.
It's a power dynamic that's the primary driver. It's a feeling of power. It's a poor substitute for relationship. But like everyone, men desire to be connected in good relationship. And I think that's true of every human being, male or female. Mm-hmm. And so if we start with that basic idea that everybody is longing for some kind of connection, mm-hmm. and how we get that connection, how we talk about that connection, how we speak about it can be problematic when our cultural expectations get tossed in the mix.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of where we as women get confused. It's like I think I hear you say that, and I know that that's true. But because men and women think so differently, sometimes it's really difficult not to put my expectations on him and then assume his expectations and create kind of a division.
So when we understand other people, we understand them first by imagining ourselves in their position. That creates a number of difficulties because that means I'm always going to interpret them as if I had done what they did. This is what it would take for me to do it.
Right.
Which is not necessarily the case in that relationship. The next level of interpreting another human is we interpret them according to how society says that's the way it works. And so the people around us define a thing, and our expectations define that thing for us. So if we can't do it from our own experience, which is problematic in its own right, then we also do it with what the society's telling us that it is. And in that regard, we've basically let television and movies define this whole thing for us, and not in a good way.
I agree. I think that entertainment fuels the mindsets of the culture incredibly, and even in ways that I don't even think that we're fully aware of.
No, in fact, it's actually the subtlety of it that I'm most concerned about. It's not the overt stuff that is the most problematic. At its bottom, it's an underlying assumption. For example, just to jump into the deep end here, the idea that sex is a taking rather than a giving.
Mm.
And that one idea is at the root of most of the problems.
I agree. And, when I read the Bible, because in healing from my own sexual trauma, I've really sought the Word of God, because I truly believe that the Word of God has given us wisdom in all different areas. And one of the things that I feel like the Lord directed me to, and I've talked about it in other episodes, was this idea that initially when intimacy and sex was introduced for the purpose of procreation, say with Adam and Eve, it was this understanding that they were engaging in a knowing, which required that they would have to see one another. But then the next time you see that brought up is where it says that the fallen angels, the sons of God, came and took the daughters of earth, where the corruption began.
Well, the knowing is a relational word, right? And the problem is that we've divorced the sexual act from the relationship. That's what porn does primarily. Mm-hmm. That's one of its most destructive elements, is that it allows for the removal of sex from the depth of the relationship, and why the knowing is a deep knowing and a full knowing, but we're vulnerable in that knowing. And it's that vulnerability that is precisely the problem. And a lot of the old traditions around male-female relationships were built around the idea of that vulnerability and how to protect one another from that vulnerability. And what we've done now is we've kind of stripped away that piece of it. And so now we're not even willing to acknowledge the vulnerability. Mm. And that creates a number of difficulties.
Yeah. It kind of goes back to where Adam and Eve were in the garden and they were naked and unashamed.
Yeah.
And then sin is introduced, and the very next thing is they're hiding.
And they're both vulnerable, not just the woman, mm-hmm. but in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that if we were more aware of our individual vulnerabilities, that we would be able to engage in a more healthy sexual intimacy?
Sure. I think, in order to tell the truth, I have to know the truth. Mm-hmm. In order to know the truth, I have to know my relationship with the truth, which means I really have to know myself. And in as much as I know myself accurately, I'll be able to tell the truth accurately. But we spend so much time trying to find the truth for the other person, and we tell the other person the truth about the other person, that we don't take the time to know ourselves well, and we don't get good at actually speaking the truth to one another, mostly because we think we know more than we do.
That is so good. And I can see that on so many levels playing out. But again, back to that cultural component, we have a culture that's kind of taught us that how you find your completeness is in relationship with someone else. And so we already start that off wrong.
Right. We start off with, I need you in order to be whole, which is a false premise. Mm-hmm. Because if the other person's correct behavior, correct anything, or their presence or their person is necessary for my well-being, then I've really put them in the place of God. That just starts a chain of problems in right at the very root, not just for sex.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And I can see where that works against marriages all the time.
Oh, yes.
I mean, You coach people who are in abusive relationships, and I counsel people who are on the edge. If they don't work on their own mental health and well-being, then they'll keep going in a direction where it's dangerous for them. And so I think there's a lot to that. And also, even recognizing, I'm a real big believer in attachment. So what the things that we need for attachment, if we don't receive those things like safety, security, comfort, and feeling seen, then we'll build that on different things. And so one of the things that we'll build that on is our ability to have relationship, but I even put air quotes there because it's not really relationship. It's just connection with other people in order to feel like that's our source of identity.
I do think that the attachment theory, research-wise, definitely shows a very strong predictive value there. And so I found that very useful. It also, because of that, it makes it a very useful tool for helping people understand how they interact with the other. But I think no matter what that is, or even if you know it, that idea that every interaction that I have is either because I want something or I'm afraid of something.
Mm-hmm.
And the human being, that's what we do best. We do those two things. And in terms of how our bodies function, how our minds function, independent of the spirit, it's basically those two systems. It's my seeking of desire that gets me what I want, or it's my threat detection system that protects me from what I don't want.
Yeah.
And if I understand that, well, now I can look at the other person and say, if I'm seeing a behavior I don't like, it's related to either something they want or something they're afraid of. And if I allow for that to exist in the other, then I have a better understanding of how I can connect to that other person.
Yeah.
Where I think in terms of men, the expectation is that men do not have a fear side, or that they should not have a fear side. So I will say to someone, they are probably responding out of fear. I'm like, well, he should just be a man, grow a pair. And I'm like, you don't really want a man who can't experience fear.
Right.
Because now we're talking about psychopaths.
Good point. That's so true. So how do we as women, maybe you can help us with this, how can we be more sensitive?
I think start out just understanding that even like teenagers, right? So you go back to high school, the boys are afraid of the girls, mostly afraid of rejection. And so then, of course, what do we do as a teenager? We teach them, well, buck up. You shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
Go ask. Put yourself out there, which if you're talking to a guy is exactly the right thing to tell them. But to the girls, if the guy does ask, just know he bridged over a good bit of personal fear. Right? There's a social anxiety that's attached to that,
mm-hmm.
that is not appreciated. But that's something that's common to most men.
Mm.
I mean, we all experience it differently and to different levels, and depending upon the way we were brought up and those kinds of things. Some people more confident or less. But the reason why it exists is understandable, because the last thing you want is a fearful man who's going to run away at the first sign of danger. So because women are physically more vulnerable, it makes perfect sense for them to want someone who's not going to run away at the first sign of danger.
Right.
That makes perfect sense. I don't think it's right to say we shouldn't be telling our young men, hey, you need to put shoulder to it. Because I think men do need that kind of encouragement. But I think it's appropriate to also understand that that is overcoming an inertia, a strong inertia inside
mm-hmm.
that says, I don't want to be rejected. And if a little boy's been raised up, rejected, it's very hard for them to keep doing that.
Yeah.
But you can't solve that problem by telling women, you have to accept, because
mm-hmm.
they're afraid. That's also a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't help either the women or the men.
And I think sometimes what I see is the men who, maybe express that vulnerability of their fear. Then you have women who maybe have been misused either parentally or in relationship, and they just kind of take the lead on that, and then they become controlling and even demeaning. Like you said, they become that voice that says, be a man, buck up. And both of them are injured in that moment.
Yeah. And if you want to shut a person down, do that. about whatever their weakness is, right? And and this is true, male or female. If you take a person's weakness and you shut them down, well, then they're going to withdraw.
Yeah.
And you're not actually getting the connection you want. If you want to connect to a husband or a boyfriend or whatever, to shut them down is to meet them with criticism or contempt is going to destroy the relationship. Of course, the Gottmans have done great research in that regard with the four horsemen of the apocalypse, where that whole contempt and criticism and stonewalling and then defensiveness, those four things are predictors of the demise of a relationship. One part of that is when somebody leans into the relationship and they're met with any of those four things, then those are going to put a rift in that connection.
Yeah. Man, there's just so much that, and I'm sure you see it on a daily basis too, where just marriage is under attack. And because people have been injured, there's not really healthy support in getting them back to a healthy state. And unfortunately, the church has kind of leaned into the sexual side of that support in a very detrimental way. And so recognizing like, okay, gaining trust is not about going to the bedroom. It's about gaining trust. Like, where do we miss that along the way?
Well, because having a knowing relationship is already unsafe. Put it in the bedroom, that's the most vulnerable part of knowing.
Right.
And so all we're doing is carrying our relationship into sex. And if we divorce it from the relationship, it's going to be destructive. But we carry in those destructive patterns, and then we're going to follow that through and act it out. And in so doing, if it's destructive, if our relationship is destructive to begin with, it's going to be destructive there as well.
Yeah. And I think too, recognizing that a woman's not responsible for the connection of the marriage to take place. And I think a lot of times as women, when we hear that, you just need to have more sex, that just becomes, well, what are you talking about? Like, I can't even hardly have a conversation with him, but now I'm going to have to open my body to be vulnerable. Like, it doesn't make sense.
No,
but
it's abominable advice.
So what would your advice be?
To the woman? Well, you can work on the relationship, but you can't solve that with sex.
Right.
And we got to stop telling the men that you can solve that with sex. And the problem is that we think of sex too much as an activity, and rather than a part of the relationship. And the relationship has to be good in order for that to be good. And so we need to tell the men, it's like, look, if you want that, you have to have a good relationship. And there's no other way around that. If you want your sex life to be good, then you have to have a good relationship. So if you're not having what you want in the bedroom, then it's time to start working on that actual relationship, making connection outside of the bedroom.
Yeah.
And don't treat everything as if it's foreplay. That would be what I would tell the men.
Yeah. And that's a good word too, right? It's like you're not having the better relationship because you're trying to get her into the bedroom more, but because you want to have a healthier, more giving relationship.
And the other subtle piece of that is because when sex is viewed as a taking, and then as long as I'm getting what I want, I have a good relationship. That whole idea is destructive.
Yeah.
And we both do it in different ways, so women express that taking a little differently, I suppose, but it's still, whenever the relationship is a taking, whatever it is, if I don't get this, then I'm not. The taking side of it is always going to be destructive because the whole point of the relationship is a giving.
Yeah, I would think that, as you're saying that, I'm wondering if the sexual side of it can be the taking for the male, then I would say that the time side of it is the taking for the female.
Could be, yeah.
Because I see that a lot. Like, well, if he would give me more time, or if he spent more time with us as a family, or, because he does this, anything that separates them out of that space of time then becomes the interruption for them and the trust and the relationship and the intimacy, the vulnerability. I do see that very often.
Well, and the expectations can be outsized. And I think part of this may be, and it's like a little bit of theory for me, is that I think sometimes women expect for the man to be a male girlfriend.
Ooh, that's good.
So they expect the relationship to be like the bestest of all girlfriends, only male.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's not an expectation that most men are going to fulfill very well.
Mm.
I mean, I suppose there's some who can, or maybe your expectations of girlfriends is low enough that it would be. But I think sometimes it's like, he is who he is. You have a relationship with who he is, not who you wish he was. And if you can accept him based upon who he is, well, then that's the relationship you want to have. If you start getting into, I will only have the kind of relationship he wants if he gives me the kind of relationship I want, that becomes a taking and it ends up breaking.
Yeah. And a power imbalance.
Yep.
For sure. And I think too, man, it's so good that you said that, because even if I think about, like, I'm a big reader and I used to read a ton of fiction, but not so much anymore. But I recognize that, like, generally the romantic storyline is going to be this male figure who is very much that girlfriend. Like, he's going to, go shopping with her. He's going to, tell her she's pretty. He's going to, like, all of those things that generally, and we did an episode on platonic intimacy, but that was one of the things that we said, like, girls don't dress for guys, they dress for girls. And so the more that you start to put the mindset of a female on a male, you're not going to see the male.
Right.
Yeah. That's good.
Well, so I mean, that's one of the, I think, more interesting things is I think sometimes women expect that men are going to want to have an intimate relationship if they're pretty. That is far less likely than most people think.
Really?
Now, there are some men who feel that way. So that's not like that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But they're usually the kind of men you don't want.
Fair warning.
Yeah. But the truth is that the idea of connection is much more valuable to a man than I think women realize.
How can you help us realize that? Am I asking a lot of you?
So this is where I think we've hurt men in our society, is we've taken this conversation off the table for men. So like you said, you talked to your husband about this conversation. I talked to my wife about this conversation. I said, she's asking me if I want to have this conversation. It's kind of one of those, what do you think about that? And for me, it was the primary motivator for that was, I do not want to say anything in this conversation that is going to hurt the relationship that I have with my wife.
Right. Yeah.
That's my primary consideration. And so I want to make sure that she's got it. These are the things that I would be saying. These are the things that I'm interested in talking about. These are the things that I intend to avoid, And so, because for me, that relationship that I have with her is more valuable than anything. And I see men who value that relationship. If they can't have it with their wife, then they will value it with their children. And there are the bad apples. There are the self-centered, egotistical, obnoxious men who don't care about anything. But that kind of man is not the bulk of men. And so I think sometimes women are looking for Saul, and they kind of end up getting the kind of man that they were looking for.
That's good. And I think, even I hear that a lot. Well, if my husband wasn't so narcissistic, and then we pare that down, like, okay, well, first of all, let's not start with labeling.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk to me about what that narcissism looks like in the home? And very often it looks like more of a selfishness rather than a narcissism, which only sees self, only cares for self. And so recognizing, okay, if we take the label of narcissist off and we put it where it is, maybe it is selfish, why do you think he has to fill that need versus seeing, cooperation?
Sure. And I think it might be useful with women to ask, and I don't really broach this very often because this is not like in my wheelhouse, but I would probably want to ask in such a circumstance, what do you expect from him? Followed up by, what can he expect from you? And those should be roughly equivalent. And if they're not, if it's imbalanced, somewhere we got a problem. And it can be imbalanced in both directions. But that expectation question kind of can reveal a lot about the dynamic that's going on. And again, it will reveal out, are we dealing with a taking or are we dealing with a giving? And this is something that I talk about a lot on this front, which is you cannot create an equal relationship by aiming for equality. It never works. The reason is if we actually have aiming at an equal relationship, we're always going to be fighting a little bit for ourselves because we're going to feel a little bit like we got the short end of the stick. So we're going to elevate a little bit. And so we tend to try to create equality because we see it in our favor anyway. That's just our natural human bent. It's going to create an unequal relationship if I do that. The only way to create an equal relationship is do what God says in Philippians, which is to each esteem the other better than themselves. But the important thing about that is a lot of times people think that means I lose myself. That's disastrous.
Yeah.
And a lot of marriages have been ruined because people have counseled women, you need to prioritize him and put yourself aside. And that doesn't work.
No.
So the next verse says what? It says, look not only for your own needs, but also for the needs of the others. In other words, my needs are in the mix and I need to be able to protect that. So my needs are important. And their needs are important, but I'm going to prioritize theirs. Equal importance, but I prioritize theirs.
Yeah.
So now when I prioritize the other person's needs without sacrificing my own, I can create a little bit more equal relationship. When we have that with both of us, then we're doing good. So the protecting of my own needs prevents this from getting out of hand. Because now if my needs aren't being met, then we're in trouble. And if for no other reason that sooner or later, I'm going to resent that.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to protect you from my future resentment. And so I'm going to just let you know I have some needs here that need to be met. And so prioritizing the other's needs feels like a little bit like I'm getting the short end of the stick. But a genuinely equal relationship is going to feel just a teeny bit like I'm giving more than I'm getting. What you don't want is that to be lopsided.
Yeah.
And so when you got both people giving and comfortable with giving, and the flow of the relationship is outward. Where we get in trouble is we treat that as if it's an expectation of their flow should be towards me. And that's when we get in trouble, is because we treat that as if that's an expectation. And so preserving my own needs says, I'm not expecting you to meet my needs. I'm informing you of my needs because I am going to meet my needs. Those are needs. They're going to get met one way or another. I just want you to know what they are. And in this relationship, you need to know, I will prioritize your needs, but I'm not giving up mine.
That's so good. That's so good. And when you make it about the giving in order to receive, that's manipulation.
Well, it's transactional and it's going to be a disaster.
For sure.
And it results in contempt. I'm not getting you're not fulfilling all the things that I should do, and you're not giving me what I want. And that creates all kinds of resentment. And you end up with kind of the lighter version of it. It's like criticism, right? It's like you're not being the godly this or the godly that. You're not living up to what you're supposed to do. And all of that is a taking. And I really think at its root, because this is one of the things that my wife and I spoke about was like that. What's the core of all of this really issue? And for us, it came down to that. It's you have to understand the relationship as a giving, not a taking, and that carrying into the bedroom changes everything.
Yeah, that is very true. And I think too, when we understand that it's a mutual giving, and I do like what you said, like I have needs and those needs are going to be met kind of with or without you, which not an angry statement, but just I recognize that my completeness is not connected to what you do for me, but rather who I am and how God is moving in me and working in me and fulfilling those needs. If you are unwilling, he himself can fulfill those needs. But I think also there's this understanding that there is an expectation of what my willingness should be and what your willingness should be. And very often they're disproportionate.
Yeah. Well, so we can just start out right here is what we told our kids when they were goofing off and teasing each other was, if the other person isn't having fun, you shouldn't do it. So just transfer that.
Yeah.
Right? If it's not enjoyable for one, it shouldn't be enjoyable for the other. And if it is, there's a real problem. I think along those lines, a really useful book has been Sheila Gregoire's book, The Great Sex Rescue. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yes, great book.
It's been a very, very, just a fantastic addition to the literature on that, I think.
I agree. And because so many other books have been written that have put almost this expectation on men, like you have a right to have these expectations from your wife, and she is not being a good wife because she's not meeting those expectations. I mean, and even I remember having a conversation because, again, so many women have experienced sexual assault and sexual trauma. We can't dissolve that out of the conversation.
Nope.
And I think a lot of those books did. They made it about, well, your wife just needs to chill out and you're still the man of the house.
Right. So there's a subtle thing in that. Because when we say that and we put it that way, what we're really doing is we're putting the power dynamic back into the marriage bed rather than equality. And once we put the power dynamic into sex, we ruin it. That's what porn does. And so there is no room for a power play in sex.
Yeah.
None.
Not healthy.
No,
not life-giving.
If what you're doing because you're the man, then you're doing it wrong. And giving that advice is colossally bad.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's just going to create more resentment, you know? I mean, I can't tell you how many women I have come into my office and be like, well, you know, it's time to have sex. It's been 2 days and all of his friends are checking in on him because he has, you know, porn accountability. And, oh man, it's been 2 days since you've had sex. What's wrong with what? Like, hello, I've been in seasons where it's been weeks and months because not every season allows for that kind of continual sexual activity. Am I wrong?
So I believe obligatory sex is a bad idea. Always, always, always. The moment you do that, it's no longer a giving, it's a taking. And again, that's going to be like over and over and over again, we come back down to it. What it does is it creates a taking rather than a giving. And so in a healthy sexual relationship, my concern is the other's good.
Right. So if I just had a baby, my husband should be more mindful of the fact that I'm nursing.
And if he's not,
25
you've got
hours
a
a day.
real problem.
Right. Yeah.
Right. If that is a thing and he can't understand that, you have a real problem in your relationship and not like a little bit of a problem. That's a major problem. If my pleasure produces your hurt and I'm okay with that, I do not love you. That's a disaster.
Yeah. And I think that needs to be clear. Like that is not loving. You are not, the mindset that is formed there, I think is misinformed, obviously. I need men to hear, like that is not loving.
So from a male perspective now, we want to flip it.
Okay.
What does that look like for the woman?
When that's the expectation.
How is it a giving?
How is it a giving for her?
Because I think women see it as a taking too, but they see it as a men taking. And even if it's healthy, they see it as it belongs as a taking, not as a giving. If as a woman, you see sex as a taking and the man is doing the taking and I'm doing the okaying, we're missing the point that it's still a giving on both sides. And so it's, what does the giving look like from a female perspective? Because we can define it really easily from a male perspective. That conversation is had everywhere, but it's not on the flip. We don't have that conversation very often.
About the woman being more giving?
And what does it look like for the women to see sex as a giving?
Well, I think that part of that comes from mutual regard in that space, you know, that I recognize that love my husband and I want to be with him, and see those qualities and recognize that need, not from a space that says I have to fulfill that need, but
Definitely.
more from a space that says I love this man and I want to be with him and I want to physically connect with him as a way of expressing that, even if that's not my primary way to receive love.
But why not communicate it? Why I want to connect to him? Why not I want him to feel a connection with me? So even the way we describe it is egocentric.
That's good. Right. Yeah. I want to correct that.
And I don't think it's because anybody's got a problem. And one of the first things that happens, you have this kind of conversation, the danger of this kind of conversation is that one side uses this conversation in a way to coerce the other side into the behavior they want. And that is a disaster. And it's doing a tremendous disservice to the relationship. The moment I put a crowbar on someone else's mind or actions, I am undermining the quality of that relationship. And so I should drop that crowbar and live in absolute freedom. And so in order to prevent that, I have to know what I'm willing and not willing to do and why. And then I have to be clear about that. And so it's not wrong to say, I am not enjoying this. So the answer is no. It's also not wrong to look for, how can I exist in a world where you are having your needs met? How can I create an environment in which that is true? But I can't do that if I don't have an environment where it's also true. And so in this, it's in particularly with respect to the sexual relationship, marriage must be exactly equal.
Yeah. And I like the fact that you talked about, I was thinking about Ephesians 5:21, because that's the one, 5:21 is the one that is used very often as the battering ram for women, is that wives submit to your husbands. And I've heard you say, and I love it, the way that you explained that. And so would you share?
Yeah. So the first thing to know is that in verse 21, we do not find the verb for the sentence in verse 21. We actually find it in the previous verse. Each of you be submissive to one another, which means if everybody is being submissive to everyone else, how is that a hierarchical statement?
Right. Which is what you said. It's the giving on both sides.
Right. Everybody's doing the giving. And just because I've told you should submit doesn't mean that the other person must be the boss.
That's good.
Right. So dominion doesn't have any place in the Christian church. It certainly doesn't in the Christian home. I am not Lord in the home, and anyone who says otherwise wants me to be an idolater. And so I'm unwilling to accept that idea because Jesus is Lord over both of us, and independently so. So this is that we sit in a cooperative relationship. And the reason that's possible is because we all have the Spirit of God who's guiding us and directing us. So we don't need that position because Jesus is there and present and ruling in our lives. And so to create that artificially by creating something that wasn't intended to be that way to begin with, we've really messed it up. The verse 21, Ephesians 5:21, qualifies the all of you be submissive to one another for the wife. And that is to remind the wife that her authority is Jesus. And some people interpret that verse in a completely abominable way to suggest that the husband, she is to treat the husband as if he is the Lord. That is utterly horrendous. It's an idolatry.
It is idolatry. Yeah.
And it shouldn't be allowed. That one's really problematic, but because what the submission does is it creates, the way that verse is taught creates a relationship of taking. It creates a very one-sided relationship that goes disastrously wrong. And then the reason why it gets one-sided is because now we go to the husband's responsibility. And now that's taught as the husband is to love. And how does he do that? By exercising his dominant, like Jesus is dominant, except that that's not actually how Jesus exercised lordship.
That's right.
He exercised lordship with humility. He humbled himself. He went lower, not higher. He's not accepting a dominant position. He's accepting the least dominant position by sacrifice. He's not looking after his own needs first. He's actually sacrificing himself for the benefit of the other. And by service, I'm serving the interest of the other. That's Jesus.
Yeah.
And so that's why we feel free in a relationship with Christ, is because he's come to set us free, and his love does that.
Yeah.
Sets us free, removes the fear. We don't have those things in a relationship with Christ because he takes it away.
Right.
And if we're going to have a gospel-oriented marriage, we can't do it with this fake dominance that Jesus never emulated for us.
That's so good and so true and so missing.
Yeah. Now, he is Lord. Right? Which is different than me. I'm not Lord. He is Lord, and he still does that. So surely I shouldn't do something Jesus doesn't do.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that, because I talk like this, and one of the first things I get is a comment, oh, you're just one of those liberal egalitarians. And the funny thing that most people are shocked to hear is that I find myself to be a complementarian. And then my complementarian friends are utterly convinced I'm an egalitarian. My egalitarian friends are utterly convinced that I'm a complementarian. But I also don't like the complementarian side, because we're basically both fighting over who gets to be boss. And I think we're both fighting over Satan's idea of what leadership should look like. I think we're both wrong. And so you could call me a radical complementarian if you want, or for that matter, you could call me a radical egalitarianist. I actually believe you can't be equal if you don't accept differences. You can't create equality while denying that there are differences. It doesn't work. And by the same token, you can't create a complementarian idea without simultaneously understanding that we're to treat one another as equals.
Yeah.
And so even if I'm not, I should treat you as if I am. I should give you the respect as someone who is my equal, even if we're not. That's the giving. It's interesting to me. And so I've kind of got my Bible up here on my iPad. And because I think all of this, what I've been saying, is really spoken of here in 1 Corinthians 7, which is the only verse that I'm aware of anyway. There might be somebody can correct me, but I'm only aware of this one place where power or authority is used to describe the marriage relationship.
Okay.
The only place. And the Bible describes it exactly equal. That is this: the wife does not have authority over her own body. Authority is power. But the husband does. And likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does.
Wow.
When I make this a demand-based verse, you have to give me what I want because you don't have power over your own body. I am actually disobeying my side of the equation.
Right.
And so this verse is exactly equal. In other words, whatever I can demand, she can demand. Whatever power I have, she has. And if we don't do that, we're in trouble. And I think that should be equally true on both sides.
Yeah.
So whatever power the woman wants to have in the relationship, she should expect the man to have the same kind of power. And so I think sometimes we try to create a power imbalance for ourselves because we want to feel strong. So we find the way in which we and our personality most naturally feel strong, and we lean into that. And that makes the other person feel weak. And it creates in the other person the same insecurities that we feel, and basically ends up in kind of creating a dynamic that becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. Is there any way that we can eject this pattern? I mean, wouldn't a better thing to be looking for would be being good to one another? Like seeing my husband as a good man and treating him as such, and then him seeing me as a good woman and treating me as such. Wouldn't that be a better mindset?
So the problem with that is if I paint an ideal and say we should be doing this, then I'm also giving myself permission to crowbar the other person into that ideal. And because we can't meet the ideal, I give myself permission to not meet the ideal. And I create an imbalanced relationship.
Okay.
So I can't argue to or from the should.
Understand.
In fact, pretty much in any good relationship, if you just avoid should, you're going to be okay.
Yeah, I agree. I teach that a lot. It's very true.
Right?
Yeah.
Just skip
Shoulda,
the should.
woulda, coulda.
Yep.
Just
skip
what
the
did you
shoulds.
do and
for
why?
For yourself and for others, skip the shoulds. Instead, what is it? And one of the interesting things about us as humans, we are communal beings. God created us for community. And because of that, there is an unspoken connection that we have that most people don't appreciate. That is, when I feel insecure, the way I am in that relationship produces insecurity in the other person. If I am fearful, I produce fear. If I am confident, I produce confidence. And a lot of times you're like, well, but, especially you hear this when someone who is speaking about an abuser is they're the most confident person I've ever seen. They are the alpha male person. And what is actually true is they are the most insecure person, and they're just compensating. The truly secure person is actually the humble person. And the less humble is the less secure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so we've lost that rubric of understanding the people that we're with and not appreciating humility. Instead, we appreciate bluster as if that's what it means to be truly confident, truly competent as a human being. But if we actually go to the research, we recognize immediately that humility is the better path. Even just secular research says this.
Yeah. Well, because it's power under submission, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So if we just take that simple bit and say, okay, well, what does that mean? What it means is that if I'm going to assess the relationship, I have to start with me. I can't start with what should they do. I have to start with what should I do. And so the first thing I have to do is get really, really good at the truth, because you can't have a good relationship without truth.
That's good. Yeah.
And that means I have to be able to tell myself the truth about what is, without any self-deception, without any lies, just straight up, I am this. I am angry. I am frustrated. I am disappointed. I am afraid. To be able to tell myself the truth about myself. I can't even begin to tell the other person the truth unless I know where I'm at.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm describing the truth from a perspective that I don't recognize. And I'm supposing something that isn't real. And the communication will never be good. So I have to locate myself truthfully first. Then I can speak to the other person, not about them, but about me. This is what I am feeling. This is where I'm at. This is the thing that's happening in my life and my mind. I can't tell them the truth unless I know the truth. And then boundaries, my favorite paradigm for talking about boundaries, that's the protecting my own needs. That's where we get boundaries.
Right.
And boundaries are essential for a healthy relationship. But the way I describe it is boundaries are the kindest thing in the world, because you are giving the other person a map to how to have a good relationship with you. Now, what that means is if I give the map, but I don't know myself well, I'm giving a fake map and it won't work, or it'll be situational. It'll depend upon my mood. But if I give a good map because I know myself well, then that map is going to be dependable for the other person. And good boundaries create that kind of relationship where I now know how do I have a good relationship with the other instead of being all over the map. And so on one side, men should get good at telling where they're at, which we've not taught men how to do. And we've not taught them how to do that with a sense of purpose and strength. We've taught them that saying where you're at and what you're feeling equals weakness. And truthfully, in most men's experience, speaking about emotions to women functionally gets them weak man status. That's a big cultural problem that we got.
Yeah.
Because if a man shows humility rather than the alpha male bravado, they are not received as strong. And yet that's what the Bible says is strong. And so we're calling men to do a thing that men will look at you and say, that won't work. And they're not entirely wrong. And so that's a real problem.
I think that there's so much nuance in this, but I think what it really boils down to is, one, being clear about your own self and needs, right? And if you can just sit with that and be like, okay, I'm going to be honest with myself and I'm going to acknowledge that I need this. And then once you have that acknowledgement and you kind of have come to grips with that within yourself, then externally you start to express that, right? So having a conversation then about how my needs then become an expectation.
Well, and what I'm doing is I'm really just saying, this is the map to having a good relationship with me. That's the need. The next thing, after I've done that, I've told myself the truth for myself. I've told the other person the truth about myself, my inner world, the thing that they can't know unless I tell them. But now I'm able to tell them the truth, not about them, but the truth about how I'm experiencing them. These events, I am experiencing these things. So for instance, you called me an idiot. That's not that. I heard myself. I heard that I'm an idiot. It's like, well, now I've given an opportunity to say, well, that's what I heard, but that's not exactly what I hear that you heard that from me, but that's not what I said. What I said was what you're doing is idiotic. But I do understand how you would interpret that as I am an idiot, but that's not really what I meant. I was just objecting to this particular behavior. Right. Now it's like, oh, okay, I get that because I've met it with a lean into the connection, with an affirmation of who the person is. And I'm not telling them their being is wrong. I'm telling them that my understanding, and then they can choose to alter my understanding and say, well, no, that's not, I didn't want to call you an idiot. I don't think you're an idiot. And I give the opportunity for that. But the reason I do is because I'm describing my own experience of them rather than their behavior. That is, what am I feeling? What am I experiencing? And what do I need? And the one thing you can't do when speaking in these categories is use the word you or any substitute for you.
Right.
And it's really hard to do. Even giving examples, it's really hard to think that way. So it causes you to slow down and deliberate on how to communicate. But part of that is just simply establishing you need to know where I'm at in order to have a good relationship with me. And I want a good relationship with you. See, I will never do those things if I don't want a good relationship with you. Those will never happen with any kind of authenticity. But if I want a good relationship with you and you've given me the map, now I know how to navigate the map. Right. But if the map's always changing, I'm not going to care. I think this is one of the biggest male complaints in terms of women as a whole. And it's like it becomes like a meme, right? She's always changing. I have no idea what she wants. Yeah. One day it's this, the next day it's that. And that's true. But if I have a good map of her, I will have a good idea of what that is. And then what I get is he should just know. But I don't think like a woman. I can't just know. Yeah. I'm not a girlfriend.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
So give me the map. And a good man will always follow the map as long as it's a good map. And so if it's a truthful map, a good man is going to be able to find a way around that. And that, by the way, a truthful map will adapt to changing desires and changing circumstances, because the map isn't when I want it, you can have it. The map is, this is the kinds of things that are important to me that fulfill my want. So these are the kinds of things I'm unwilling to do. These are the kinds of things I'm willing to do and why. And if we can be honest with one another, we give an accurate map, we're going to navigate that better. A bad human is going to run over your map no matter how clear it is. And the problem with giving the map in that case is you're going to find out very quickly if you have a good relationship or not. Yeah.
And I would say a bad woman, though I hesitate saying that, would not give an accurate map in the sense that I'm going to tell you something, but that is always going to be changing. I'm going to say, I'm not going to stay in the space when you talk to me like that. But then at the same time, I'm also going to say, well, you didn't say it, but I know you thought it. And so I'm leaving, So then it can feel like, what do I do? Because no matter what I do, it's going to be wrong. Yep. And I see it on both sides. Men do it to women and women do it to men.
Well, the reason is the easiest way for me to maintain control of another person is to keep them on their heels.
Control.
It's a way to control the situation. And control is almost always a mechanism of fear.
Yes.
And that goes both directions. When I'm afraid, I try to control because the outcome is really important to me. I don't want to experience that fear. And so that attempt to control becomes another issue. Where we have a problem with abuse is it is a fear, but it's an unwarranted fear.
Yeah.
And not only is it an unwarranted fear, but now my pleasure and my satisfaction and my apprehension of it all depends upon me subjugating the other person. That's what an abusive relationship does, is it puts another person in subjugation as an attempt to make my life more fulfilling for me. And it creates a number of serious problems in that. So it's really important for us to know that and to talk about. So some of this stuff that we're talking about, if you're in a bad relationship and you do all of this, that doesn't give you a good relationship. Right? Yeah. You don't get a good relationship because you did it all right. It's one of the most heinous promises that the church has promulgated on couples is that if you do it right, you're going to get a good husband. If you do it right, you're going to get a good wife. That's not how it works. But you aren't going to have a good relationship if you don't do it well. either way. So you might as well do it well, but you're going to find out really quickly if it's a bad relationship if you do it well.
That's true. And even, kind of going a little bit back to what you said, like if fear is often what drives that power, then in that space of sexual need, it could be a fear of rejection demands that I have your availability.
Right.
So if we can maybe even speak into that, like as women saying like, look, I am exhausted. It's been a really rough week, but I see you and I love you. And what can we do so that we can feel connected? Would that work?
I suspect that one of the problems we've done, and so I think we've kind of created a problem here, because ideally, yes. And with a good man, yes. But one of the problems is we've taught even the good men that the evidence of connection is sex. And we've told all of the good men that they're basically animals, and that's what they should expect. They're going to behave like animals.
Yeah.
And we've taught the women that men are basically animals. And what we've really done is we've said that men are body-driven rather than spirit-driven.
Mm.
And that is tragic.
Yeah.
Because the truth is if we're not spirit-led, we're all body-driven. It's just we're answering different parts of our body, right? Because if my fear is driving or if my desire is driving, then the body's driving, because those are biological processes.
Yeah.
That's what Romans means by the flesh. It's a body-centric motivating factor.
Mm-hmm.
What do I desire? What am I afraid of?
Yeah.
Body's driving. Rather than the Spirit of God driving and taking control and charge of the body, we flip it around. The body takes charge and tells the Holy Spirit to get out of the driver's seat.
And I would say that would be a way to get back on track would be, am I being spirit-led? Like what I desire right now in this moment, is it spiritually driven in that I'm aware that this is something that is going to support my marriage and that is going to bring us closer? Or is it flesh driven in the sense that I'm afraid of being rejected, or I just have a need that I need met, and so I need you to be receptive to that?
Yes, though there is a danger in that, and I really want to mark that out, because a lot of trauma response is a fear response. And it's very easy for someone to take what we just said and use it as a lever to say, well, you shouldn't be flesh driven. Right. But again, now we have a taking, not a giving. So that creates a problem. But more than that is, it is important to recognize that in trauma, that physiological response is a real thing and cannot just be suppressed by will. In fact, if you try to fight the emotion, it amplifies. It's the most difficult thing to help people understand, is fighting negative emotion makes it worse. You have to deal with that situation, and you have to deal with that well. And if you can't deal with that, get with someone who can help you deal with that, and find someone who knows what they're doing and has the expertise necessary to help you deal with those emotions well. Yeah. Because if you don't, that's going to create a number of problems, even if everything else is perfectly healthy. If you have a trauma response, and if you're married to someone who has a trauma response, you have to respect that. You have to be able to give it space. Yeah. So to the men who've married a woman who has a trauma history, you have to be more careful, not less. And the more of a crowbar you put, the less of a good relationship you're going to have. That's one of the things is the marriage counseling that I end up doing a lot is I end up doing marriage counseling that's related to a person who has had an abuse background, who is now getting married into a healthy relationship, and then helping the healthy spouse understand there are some very real dynamics that you're going to face that you are not going to be able to avoid. You need to really pay attention to, or there's nothing you can do to prevent a disaster. And not because you're a bad human, but because there are real things that you have to be super careful about.
It's so true. And I think that a lot of times people who have had that traumatic past, they feel the pressure of getting fixed, like that they feel that pressure of their spouse. So like, well, that's a traumatic response and you need to deal with that because I'm not that person. But what they don't realize is very often in order to heal that space, I need that other person to be cherishing of that space with me and also help me to work through it. I know, for my husband and I, that was very much a part of our story. As long as it was something that could just kind of be dismissed, then it made it worse. But when he allowed me to, no, I don't want to say he allowed me, because that sounds like he had some kind of, when I submitted in myself to say, okay, I can keep feeling this way and I can keep having a really bad marriage and it's going to dissolve, or I can be honest that this is difficult for me and I need you to meet me in that difficulty, which I realized took a lot of bravery and courage, but I knew I was being led of the Spirit to do that. And because my husband was a good man, it was kind of the moment where the veil lifted and he was able to see like, oh, wait, you're not just dismissing me or being rejecting. There's actually something that's operating in you that makes this pain for you.
Yeah. Which is one of the reasons why, if we treat it as a giving, then I'm going to be aware that my significant other, my spouse, is not experiencing this the way they should, which means I'm going to change what I do, because I will never be satisfied if they're not enjoying this relationship in the way that I would like to enjoy this relationship. And so I'm bringing them into that enjoyment, which means I'm going to take some time and some patience, and I'm going to wait, and I'm going to go very, very slow, and I'm going to avoid certain things, and I'm not going to go into the certain things. There's going to be that kind of waiting and patient and giving, because I'm treating it like a gift. And it doesn't make any sense to give my wife a thing she doesn't like. It's nonsense, you know. That's why we laugh if a man gives his wife some kind of power tool and she doesn't actually like power tools. You're being an idiot, right? Because the whole point of a gift is that it's for them. And so if sex is a gift and my wife isn't enjoying it, I'm doing it wrong.
Right. And I will say that openness and tenderness and him being so kind and patient with me, oh my goodness, it really communicated safety that I was missing in the marriage. And so, yeah, when I saw that it wasn't his taking, but he was willing to give me something that I needed to heal, man, it totally shifted the way that I saw him.
I've actually recommended a book to men, which is an unusual book that people would not expect. It's called Miss America by Day. It's by Marilyn Vandiver. It's an old book. I think it's out of print. But the reason why it's interesting is I tell the men, pay attention to the men in the story. Don't pay attention to the story for the men. Pay attention to the men in Marilyn's story. And if you'll pay attention to that, it will be very instructive. If I was teaching a seminary class on abuse and counseling abuse, that would be one of my textbooks.
Wow.
It is a profoundly good book. Just before everybody goes out and reads it, of your listeners, just understand it will probably be triggering for a good many trauma victims. And so, you know, read it with a box of Kleenex if you're going to read it at all. Okay.
I appreciate the warning. Is there anything that you would say, you know, just to kind of wrap up this, which has been a great conversation, and thank you so much. And my wheels are turning, and I think you've given us some great things to think about. But is there anything that you would say to kind of wrap up the conversation? Like, what is one of the last things that you want to leave us with?
I would say that, oh goodness, there's so many things. We understand our relationship and the flow of the relationship in terms of a gift. And the other's enjoyment is my priority. That is going to change everything profoundly so far down the line that if you practice it, instead of practicing it in the bedroom, start practicing it in the mundane. If the bedroom is too hard, practice it elsewhere. Practice it with his relationship with fishing.
Okay.
Or her relationship with cooking. It doesn't matter what it is. Find a way to foster that giving spirit in the relationship rather than a taking spirit. And if you got two people who can do that in the easy things and then use that as a beachhead to progress further and further, it'll find its way into the bedroom and you'll have a much better relationship.
That's good advice. Yeah. And I'm going to take that advice myself and look for those ways of being more giving, even as I tremble and say that. I don't know. Why do we tremble? Because that is what it feels like. It feels very vulnerable to be giving.
It is, which is why you have to preserve your own needs and why you have to have good boundaries.
Yeah.
If you try to do this without good boundaries, then you are going to make a mess of things.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone is trying to crowbar this out of you without you having boundaries and won't allow boundaries, you are dealing with an abuser.
Mm. Yeah. And it's good that we pay attention to that.
Yeah.
We are not trying to reinforce abusive behavior.
No, in fact, if that's the case, then virtually none of this matters and you need to leave.
Absolutely. Yeah. And seek support.
Yep.
They can reach you at Banner Institute.
Yep.
They can reach out to counselors. You can reach out to me. I can give you referrals. But I 100% agree that you're going to know if you start putting these things into action and you still feel small and you still feel used, that's an abusive relationship.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like the massively abusive relationship. It can be a toxic abusive relationship, a little bit imbalanced, but those things tend to escalate.
Right.
And so that is you need to deal with this and you need to deal with that before you worry about having a better sex life. And if you think sex is the problem, you're probably wrong.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. It's usually the symptom, but it's not the problem.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, Tom, I enjoy every conversation with you and just your willingness to just explore this with me a little bit and to dive in and bring up some things that we need to hear to work together. Because I believe men and women, we need to work together. Not women need to know what to do with men and men need to know what to do with women, but we as women and men need to know what it looks like to come together to work for solutions to have healthier marriages and healthier relationships.
Just how do we connect?
Yeah.
Take every conflict as an opportunity to connect rather than dominate.
So good. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you.